For generations, China was seen as broken, its glory buried, its power stripped away, its people divided by hunger and humiliation. But nothing about its rebirth was sudden. It was forged in revolution, in ruthless decisions, in sacrifice measured not in years, but in millions of lives. To understand the rise of China is not just to revisit history, it is to confront the future and to ask the question, what happens when the dragon no longer sleeps? China once saw itself as the Middle Kingdom, the center of the world, blessed by heaven, unshakable in its order. But the 19th century brought a reckoning. When Western cannons opened fire on the coasts, the empire's illusions shattered. The Opium Wars bled China of dignity, carving it open to foreign powers who plundered its wealth and mocked its sovereignty. The old dynasty, once mighty, became a prisoner in its own palace. Foreign flags flew over Chinese ports. Foreign soldiers marched through Chinese streets. Each treaty signed was another chain around the empire's neck. Millions starved, millions fled, and rebellion after rebellion tore the land apart. The humiliation was not only political, it was spiritual. A civilization that had given the world paper, gunpowder, and the compass now staggered under the weight of addiction, corruption, and defeat. The people watched as their nation, once proud and eternal, was carved into pieces, sold to outsiders like spoils of war. For nearly a century, China was forced to bow its head, and yet, within the ashes of humiliation, a fire began to smolder, a hunger for revenge, for rebirth, for the day when the dragon would rise again. By the mid-20th century, the old empire was gone, but China was still broken. Warlords carved the nation into fiefdoms, foreign armies invaded, and civil war raged. The Japanese occupation brought slaughter and famine, leaving scars that would never heal. Out of this chaos rose a movement promising order, strength, and rebirth: the Chinese Communist Party. In 1949, Mao Zedong stood in Beijing and declared the People's Republic of China. For millions, it was the sound of chains breaking, the moment humiliation ended. Yet freedom would not come. The revolution demanded sacrifice, relentless, unflinching, unquestioned. Land was seized, enemies purged, and the country was forced onto a new path. But the dream of rapid greatness became a nightmare. The Great Leap Forward promised abundance, yet delivered starvation on a scale history had rarely seen. Fields lay empty, villages withered, and tens of millions perished in silence. Still, the march continued. The Cultural Revolution followed, a storm of suspicion and fury that tore families apart, burned books, and silenced thought. These years were not only about power, they were about survival. A nation of 1 billion was forced to endure the weight of ideology, to stumble through fire and ruin. And yet, from the wreckage, China did not collapse. It endured. And in that endurance lay the seed of something greater, an opening to a future no one yet imagined. When Mao died in 1976, China was exhausted, starved of food, starved of truth, starved of hope. The revolution had promised paradise, but left only ruins. And then came a man who spoke in quiet tones, but carried a vision that would change the world: Deng Xiaoping. Deng was no dreamer. He was a pragmatist, a survivor of purges, a man who knew that ideology alone could not feed 1 billion mouths. His gamble was simple yet dangerous: open China to the world, but keep the party's grip unbroken. Markets would be unleashed, but politics would remain iron-bound. The reforms began cautiously. Farmers allowed to sell their surplus, villages permitted to taste profit. Then came the special economic zones. Coastal cities transformed into gateways of trade, magnets for foreign capital. What began as an experiment became a tidal wave. Factories roared to life, ports swelled with ships, and the West, chasing cheap labor, poured in its wealth. For the first time in generations, China was not begging for survival. It was building for the future. Peasants became workers, villages became cities, and a people long bound by scarcity began to dream of prosperity. But every gamble comes with a price. To rise, China would have to embrace the fire of global capitalism, while never letting go of its single-party fist. And the world was about to learn just how powerful that combination could be. The world's factory. By the 1990s, the gamble was paying off. China was no longer a sleeping giant. It was an engine awakening with unstoppable force. In city after city, smokestacks pierced the sky, assembly lines stretched for miles, and millions of hands worked day and night. The world had discovered something it could not ignore. China could produce anything faster, cheaper, and on a scale no rival could match. Foreign companies rushed in, hungry for profit. Nike, Apple, General Motors. They built in China, and China built for them. The nation that once begged for scraps now exported to every corner of the globe. From toys to textiles, from steel to smartphones, made in China became the mark of a new age. But this was not just about trade. It was about people. Hundreds of millions left the fields behind, flooding into new megacities that rose almost overnight. Concrete jungles spread where rice paddies once lay. Families who had known only hunger now tasted wealth for the first time. It was the greatest migration in human history and the greatest escape from poverty the world had ever seen. Yet prosperity came with costs. Pollution choked the skies, rivers ran black, and the divide between rich and poor widened. Still, the machine could not stop. By the dawn of the new millennium, China was not just the world's factory. It was becoming the workshop of its own destiny, ready to challenge the order built by others. The new Silk Road. As China's cities rose and its factories roared, its ambitions outgrew its own shores. The leadership looked outward and saw opportunity, not just in trade, but in influence. In 2013, a new vision was unveiled, the Belt and Road Initiative. Its name recalled the ancient Silk Road, when Chinese goods once traveled by caravan to faraway lands. But this was no memory, it was strategy. The plan was vast. Railways across Asia, highways through the mountains of Pakistan, ports in Africa, power plants in the Middle East, digital cables beneath the seas. Wherever money was scarce and infrastructure broken, China would step in with loans, engineers, and steel. Roads and bridges carried more than cargo. They carried Beijing's reach into the heart of dozens of nations. For some, this was salvation. New jobs, new trade, a chance to grow. For others, it was a trap. Debts that chained governments to Beijing. Projects that placed Chinese influence at the very center of foreign economies. The world debated, was this generosity or conquest by another name? But for China, the logic was clear. To secure the future, it needed allies, markets, and resources. It could not rise alone. The new Silk Road was more than a network of trade. It was a declaration that China was no longer just a participant in the global order. It was rewriting it. Technology, power, and rivalry factories made China rich, but technology promised to make it powerful. By the 2010s, the dragon had turned its gaze to innovation, 5G networks, artificial intelligence, electric cars, and space exploration. Companies like Huawei, Tencent, and BYD became not just national champions, but global contenders. What once was copied was now created. At the same time, China's military, once outdated and weak, underwent a transformation. Aircraft carriers slid into the seas, stealth jets roared into the skies, and missile systems bristled along its coasts. In the South China Sea, reefs became fortresses, turning disputed waters into stepping stones of power. Beyond Earth, rockets carried Chinese astronauts into orbit, with eyes fixed on the moon and Mars. But every rise brings rivals. The United States, long the dominant power, watched with alarm as Beijing's influence spread. Trade wars erupted, sanctions struck, and technology became a battlefield. Allies questioned loyalties, neighbors feared pressure, and flashpoints like Taiwan loomed ever closer to confrontation. Yet inside China, the story was told differently. To its leaders, this was not aggression. It was justice. After centuries of humiliation, the nation was reclaiming its rightful place. To its people, it was pride restored. But to the world, it was a question with no easy answer. Was China's rise the promise of a new global balance, or the prelude to a storm? The future of the dragon. China's rise is not a story finished, but a story still unfolding. In less than a lifetime, it has journeyed from famine to factories, from isolation to influence, from weakness to the edge of supremacy. No empire in history has risen so far, so fast, and yet the path ahead is uncertain. Inside its borders, China faces shadows, an aging population, a slowing economy, inequality that festers, and an environment pushed to the brink. Beyond its borders, rivals wait, alliances tighten, and the old order resists the new. Every step forward brings admiration and suspicion. Every success deepens both respect and fear. The question is no longer whether China has risen. The question is what kind of power it will become. Will the dragon soar as a force of stability, reshaping the world in cooperation? civilization? Or will it clash with those who see its rise as a threat plunging us into conflict? History does not answer, it only warns. Once, China was the heart of the world. Then it was broken, humiliated, nearly erased from the stage. Now, it has returned, carrying with it the weight of the past and the ambitions of the future. And as the 21st century unfolds, one truth is inescapable: the dragon is awake, and the world will never be the same.